Welcome to Nudge and Boost for Better Living with Dr. Bob Crow. The purpose of this series of broadcasts is to share proven strategies you can use to build happier and more successful living at home, work, play, everywhere, all the time. And now your host, Dr. Bob Crow.
Good day. It's nice to be back with you after a week of absence. Anyone who's listened to the previous shows knows this one is one that's encouraging people to understand what behavior is governed by, that is the principles, natural principles of behavior. And I'm labeling them nudge for those things that cause behavior to happen, and boost for what happens after behavior that strengthens or weakens it. And in fact, I've said a number of times that boosts give nudge their power. That is, you learn to do things in the presence of what we call nudges. Today's show is going to emphasize a look at the big picture. I've said a number of times that all we do is behavior. Behaviors are learned in accordance with more or less nudging and boosting. But in the past, I pointed out that motivational circumstances are impacting us, surrounding us all the time. In a condition of many motivations, some nudges come along. In the past, I mentioned if you're hungry, you might see the nudge of a restaurant, maybe even a McDonald's, and the behaviors of going in there, ordering a hamburger, and consuming it are a natural order of a motivation, followed by signals, cues, nudges to do certain class of behaviors which are done, and they earn outcomes that are related to the motivations and are reinforcing or boosting. So I use those terms interchangeably, but nudge and boost, I think, are acceptable terms that are easy to remember and I hope easy to use. Now, in the big picture, well, let me back up. I've been emphasizing using those tools for yourself, or maybe those about you, which you're doing for your own self-interest anyway. You might, regarding yourself, use nudges and boosts to get you to attend the gym more regularly or participate in the exercises there to a greater extent. For your own self-interest, but to the betterment of another, I've mentioned examples like encouraging your student to do well in class or study at home, and described that the way you do that, the way you get your student to study is to arrange nudges, a place for them to do their studying, arrange their materials, and prompt them, nudge them, remind them now is the time to study. And as they study, you occasionally boost them. Say, glad to see you on task. I know your grades are going to be great as they have in the past, or improve as they need to do. And look forward to doing things with you as your grades, positive things with you as your grades improve. So I've been emphasizing a sort of person-centered look at nudge and boost, hoping that some, maybe all or many of the audience will recognize that these are tools that make sense, and I'm saying that they're based on behavior science, so they're science-based. So you have science-based, sensible rules, tools, strategies you can go forward, and you can strengthen your own behavior or others. And I've pointed out things like your own personal quality of life can be improved if you boost more. If just by being more positive to others, you are strengthening their behaviors that you desire, and you're changing your positive attitude during the day. If you count how many boosts you present to your coworkers and family and friends, or even people on the street, and find this, and I've mentioned this data before, that you might find that in a day you say 100 positive things. So you might double that to 200, and your life on other people's is more positive. So I've been emphasizing the individual, but I mentioned that today's look will be at the big picture. And frankly, I'm an aggravated citizen today. We are in a time when many people would identify our government as not functional. We look at Washington, and we look even in our local governments, and we expect them to do things that make our lives better. Probably almost all, or at least the vast majority of people holding those positions of influence and power and capacity for system change really wish to do better by their citizens. I'm sure their motives include making the quality of life for those around them improved by the actions they take. Unfortunately, they get into a system that is complex and often, maybe almost always, calls for them to do actions that are not oriented toward bringing about improved quality of life for the citizens they represent, and even maybe themselves. The truth is that everything we do is behavior, and all our behaviors are influenced by the consequences that follow them. So that if you're in business, encourage people to buy your product in various ways, and they do it, you're boosted by success in your business. If you're a teacher in the classroom and you're better about boosting your students for being on task and presenting better responses to learning tasks, then your life is more pleasant and you're boosted for boosting, which I think is very nice. But we have a situation in Washington where there's a huge committee of committees called Congress that we're looking toward to improve our lives. Keeping that in mind, I opened the paper this morning, which I do every morning. And let me digress a little bit. My daily routine begins by getting the paper and looking through it while sucking down a cup of coffee. So two things are particularly striking about this morning's paper. One of them is that Russia says that they would like us to be, U.S., to be more cooperative with them, and to prove that, they're kicking out about 455 of U.S. employees in the Russian consulate, which is supposed to really sting us hard. I'm not sure why that is. And Putin, it says here, he has the hope that he wouldn't need to use these drastic measures, but he hopes that in the future that we'll be more constructively cooperative with Russia because he kicked out a bunch of American workers from Russia. That does not sound sensible, does it? How do you go with that news? Why does Russia seek cooperation? What is cooperation? And do we seek cooperation with Russia? Why would they want to cooperate? Let's think about cooperation from a behavioral perspective a bit. Cooperation means that two or more individuals working together accomplish things that are rewarding to both of them or all of them. Cooperation is collective effort that results in outcomes that are positive for all those who are working on it. Competition, on the other hand, is defined by a situation in which people are working toward one available set of positive outcomes, and only one of them will achieve those outcomes. So let's look at Russia and the U.S. What are we working toward where if we work together, both of us, both countries, will increase their positive circumstance? Is that the space station? Is cooperation shown by the U.S. and Russia working in the space station? We cooperate by having crews in the International Space Station, and we and they sending supplies up there and now and then exchanging personnel. Is that cooperation? Maybe, but it could be viewed as competition, that in the space station, information of great importance is collected and used differently by the countries that are participating, probably for their own best interests. We put the space station up there. I wonder if maybe we should have kept control of it to ourselves and had a competitive edge over other countries instead of cooperating and sharing the booty that comes from it. But I'm sorry, I'm a little disjointed. The newspaper and current events have me aroused, and I'm going to say more about that, hopefully to be constructive, right after this break. This program is brought to you by the book authored by Dr. Bob Crow entitled Nudge and Boost for Better Living. Get more information or buy at www.nudgeandboost.com.
And now back to Nudge and Boost for Better Living with Dr. Bob Crow.
We are back, and I'm not much less aggravated now than I was on the rambling tirade at the opening. I imagine it isn't a bad idea to share with the audience that we can be aggravated, but we should do something about it. And I've been pushing nudging and boosting, and you can use nudging and boosting on your politicians as well as the wife and coworkers had the man on the street. But all behavior is in some kind of motivational circumstance, and it is nudged before it occurs, and after it occurs, some consequence comes, which I'm hoping will be boosting, although it could be punishment. I'm emphasizing boosting. With that in mind and that refreshed, we're back talking about aggravation. So in the newspaper, we're alerted that the tax system is going to be reviewed, which we're hearing in all forms of news. But the newspaper kind of rubs it in your nose. Do you believe that the new tax system will be functional, that is, do things that are helpful in moving toward a higher quality of life in our country? Do you anyway think that the tax system will be fair? That is, that people, all people, would judge it as appropriate, the amounts they pay and the way they pay it are appropriate and fair? And do you think that the tax system will support, call for, encourage a higher quality of life? Well, if you do, you must be by yourself, because I can't imagine anyone believing that big dysfunctional committee in Washington, D.C. is actually going to work on something that makes sense. And makes sense how? Well, I would emphasize behaviorally, that things are done by those who can accomplish them that result in systems that yield outcomes that are good for us. We have party system, and they give us people to vote for. And both parties, or if we're only talking about two, pound their chests and say they're right, and if they could just get a supermajority that they could do really well. Well, they don't do really well. When I moved to Florida and went through the Department of Motor Vehicles to get my new driver's license, the very pleasant clerk asked me would I like to register to vote in Florida now that I was a resident. That was about 10 years ago. And I said, thank you, that's a nice opportunity. We appreciate it. What do I need to do? Just tell me what party you would like to be affiliated with, and I can enter it. And I said, I don't want to be affiliated with either of those parties. And she laughed and said, that's what most people say who come through the line. And I'm now indicated as an independent. Why are so many people disenchanted with what the political parties are doing? Well, it's because of social value system and striving for control by those systems in a nudge and boost sort of interpretation. Everyone works in their own self-interest all the time. That doesn't need to be a cruel and nasty sounding statement. You're careful about crossing the street so you won't get run over. You smile and wave at people because you get a smile and wave back. You study for an examination so that you'll get a higher score. You're always working in your own best interests. Somebody comes along in Congress and says, hey, I want you to vote for my bill. And the other person says, I'll vote for yours if you vote for mine. Those individual self-interests were expressed and have to be then selected by those who hear it. I don't know if I can bring myself to vote for his bill, and I'm not sure I can recruit him to vote for my bill. I think we ought to look for ways so that people be on the same page, working, pulling in the same direction. Is there anyone who is not in favor of every person in our country, in the world, being healthy or being safe, having enough food, feeling self-worth, being a good citizen in the community where they live, being productive, having a basic quality of life? Does anybody argue with that? I can't imagine. So we have to do things in order to reach those outcomes. The things that reach those outcomes could be called functional. These actions, that is functional, where these actions yield steps toward and finally result in everyone being healthy, everyone being safe, everyone having food, everyone having self-worth, everyone being productive, being a good citizen, enjoying a basic, reasonable quality of life. Those outcomes are achieved through behaviors, and behaviors are done by you and me and Congress and everyone we can look around and see. And their behaviors are controlled by nudges and boosts. Now, citizens have a difficult time boosting politicians. They often try to nudge politicians. They write letters. They paint signs and stand outside the White House. Those are nudges, but often they don't even specify what behaviors are wanted. The signs say, get out of town, don't do that, save Medicaid. I can empathize with those who want to save programs that are important to them, but they're really trying to save the opportunities that those programs present, like having a job, having a house, having food on the table. From a nudge and boost perspective, we could recognize that those outcomes of having food on the table and having a house over your head can go along with being healthy and safe and productive, in that those are classes of behaviors that are very important for an individual. Now, one of the list of things that may be primary in a quality of life is being productive and feeling self-worth. I believe that a person holding a job and doing something important for the community is proud of what they do, and their self-worth is increased in high, possibly too high, and they're a better citizen as a function of having opportunities to work and contribute to their community. I would be one who would want to examine the resources we've got in our country and see how they might be rearranged so that people could work for the best interests of themselves and their community in our country. That means jobs should be available. People should be supported into being sufficiently prepared to accomplish those jobs, and a reasonable wage should come from them. Where do those jobs come from? Well, in World War II, after the Depression, we had the WPA and the CCC as programs you can look up that FDR, you can look that up too, put in place and were very successful in causing people to have jobs that made sense and made them feel like they're contributing and gave them an income that they desired. Maybe this is a good time for our country to think about how much do you actually have to spend military and other overseas and in-country programs. One of the characters in my book estimates that 40% of the federal budget is wasted. I'd be surprised if it's that small. We see reports of expenditures like for ghost soldiers overseas, $1 billion a year. Well, that could go a long way toward employing people to help with planting trees and cleaning up our neighborhoods and being good citizens. So I think that's pretty close to the end of my tirade for today. I'll read to you one of the reviews of my book, and you see why I'm doing that. Quote, Dr. Crow's passionate belief in the power of behavior analytic principles to improve humans' lot on this planet comes through on every page of this exciting original work. And they say more. But maybe I've shared with you some passion, and maybe I've aroused your interest in behavior methods for accomplishing outcomes that we would like to. And we've come to a time for a break. Dr. Crow's book, Nudge and Boost for Better Living, is available at Amazon.com.
And now back to Nudge and Boost for Better Living with Dr. Bob Crow.
Darling, if you want me to be closer to you, get closer to me. Darling, if you want me to be closer to you, get closer to me.
We're moving from individual tirade that's supposed to be actually constructive to a question and answer. We have Quincy to our left, and he always has interesting questions, and I try to be responsive.
My question to you, what upset you so?
It's frustration. Every day we see things in the news, on TV or newspaper. I'm one of the few people that takes a newspaper, which is worth a little discussion itself, that many of my friends say, oh, I don't take the newspaper anymore because of all the bad news. I don't share that. I like to see the editorials, the letters to the editor, and some glance at what the local news is. National news I can see on TV or other feeds. But even though on those other feeds, I'm frustrated about the accuracy and completeness of the information I get. So I'm frustrated in not having good data. I'm introduced myself as a scientist. I would like to see data. How many robberies are there in the country each day? Are there 10,000? Who commits them? Why is it that in our newspaper or any newspaper or news somewhere, you see 36 black faces looking out at us as perpetrators? Is that representative? Is that right? There were 40 robberies in these 36 that we're looking at are black and are representative? Or were there 1,000 robberies and 36 of them were black, which means the huge majority were white? We don't get enough good information. And any pairing of news, positive and negative, with the people who are newsworthy tends to build them to be more positive or negative, whoever they are. So we are getting now much bad news about Washington over many, many pairings of bad news with senators and congressmen, we are all reducing our esteem, our value, our treasure of our leaders in Washington. They really must start doing things that are quality, productive for our country. I am frustrated in seeing Washington hamstrung by the pressures that cause them to do things not good for our country, or at least not doing things that are good for our country. I want them to do functional things that are contributing to our quality of life, and I'm not seeing it. I am frustrated.
What's wrong with America First?
That's a nice slogan. What does it mean? If one of the things means that we should buy products of the United States, or we should try to protect our borders so that competing items don't come in and displace our own manufacturing personnel and profits, that sounds good. It bears.
Other countries do?
I don't know. And see, that you brought me back to my frustration. What is the case?
Yeah.
People are saying this is the way it is. Well, I don't know if that's true anymore. So I would like us, maybe this is leading to the conclusion that we need a huge database, a true information database, measures, numbers that we can rely on. How much stuff is manufactured of what type in the United States? And we hear distractions about, well, it isn't really manufactured in the United States. It's manufactured in Korea or Bangladesh, shipped over here and put together, and then is that American? Boy, it's really complicated. It isn't just simply made in America. Some things are. So it's a very complicated matter, and I don't think we're very well informed. I guess that's a major feature of my frustration, too. How can I make judgments where I can be an informed citizen trying to nudge and boost my representatives if I don't have good data?
Now, the data you were talking about, isn't that pretty much colored by the factor of the person who is reporting the news and their experience with the people and the elements of the news?
Absolutely, yes. We all have very long learning histories, and humans are very quick to learn. So after a couple of years, a child is starting to have a value system that is noticeable. By the time they're 20, they have a very strong value system. By the time they're 40 and talking on the radio, they have an abundantly strong value system, and they judge what they're seeing against what they've learned to value. I think we can be more constructive if we would skip the value system and belief systems, like religion, for example. Those are nice things. You can go to church if you want to. I can too. But it shouldn't be the basis, the non-objective basis for making decisions. I think we could go to the outcomes that people would agree, that I tried to list earlier about being healthy, having food, safety, and so on. I think we all should. I can't imagine who's not going to agree that these circumstances of living should be available.
Now tell me something, that solution to the problem of the accurate information and data you were talking about, wouldn't that be solved by having multiple sources and individual perception of that data?
Maybe. Probably the consumer of information should have multiple sources they can tap on. And there are some out, that say, evaluate the truth of a statement. And then that's helpful. But it'd be even better if there are known, reliable, confirmed databases around that a person can go to and derive information helpful for them to make a decision and compare what they're hearing to objective data.
Who would control that database if there was such an animal?
Well, I'm busy. And that is a very good question. And it reduces back, I hope, to the theme of this series in Nudges and Boosts. We would need to have people who are collecting and accumulating and presenting to us data. We'd have to have people whose behaviors are nudged and differentially boosted to be abundantly accurate. You can store your belief systems in the locker on the way in if you're one of those workers. Your job is to obtain data or accumulate and present data in a reliable way. That would be their job, and there would need to be contingencies applied to their behaviors. Now and then, integrity check, were these data accumulated correctly, were they presented correctly, so that there'd be a confirmation and feedback and differential consequences to the people who handle the data in order to cause them to be reliable.
And to correct the gridlock we have in Washington, wouldn't the solution to be term limits? Like no more than 2 years for everybody.
I can tell how far you've read in the book.
Seriously?
There is a portion in the book that deals with term limit. And more or less what it says is, can you be sure that the person pushed out is replaced by someone better on the way in? That everyone is faced by motivational circumstances they've got and contingencies on their behaviors. They're nudged by people and systems, and they're differentially either boosted or not for what they do. So that if they're in Washington, D.C., in this case, for 6 months, 6 years, or 60 years, they're still under motivational circumstances. Their behavior is being either boosted or not by the powers that are able to present those consequences. The term limits don't remove the contingencies of the people who are in the position, and you don't know what their value system is. So
But it does give you an opportunity to freshen up the pot.
That's true. But I have one of my, this is my aggravation show.
Right.
One of my aggravations is that there's a system that arrives at who we can vote for. Now, one of the questions that I've now and then raised about presidential elections, not necessarily the most recent one, any of them, is the question is, why vote? Why do you get in your car and spend time and gas to go stand in a line and vote for one drip or the other? That the system has arrived at two not very desirable candidates. Why vote? It's too late in the process. You've got to get in there earlier. And I've heard that nice comment by one of the party leaders just recently, to encourage people, get in early. Recruit people who have quality that share your values, she said. And I totally endorse that. Get in early. Your vote is just a rubber stamp way at the end. Be a participant in the process. But I would hope that in the future, everyone would give much more attention to outcomes, quality outcomes. Who cares if you're a Republican or a Democrat or an independent? You should be working toward everyone having good health, food on the table, have a high level of self-worth, be productive, be a good citizen, and be equipped with problem-solving skills and contribute to the higher quality of life in our country. One of the characters in the book talks about a reorganization of the federal government, way back in the back, where it talks about the president then being a value clarification person, and Congress being one that speaks to a quality of life, outcomes that we would like to get to, and evaluating whether we're making progress toward them or not, and federal personnel being the ones who would actually do a task analysis and develop contingencies that tend to cause citizens to learn and do the behaviors that are good for them and all of us. We're bound for a break.
The Writers Alliance of Gainesville promotes, encourages, and supports aspiring and experienced regional writers. Through activities of informative meetings, workshops, and writer support groups, they encourage writers to rise to their potential. Visit their website at writersalliance.org. Alachua County Library District will host its third annual author series featuring renowned and emerging authors. Each author will speak, answer questions, and sign books. I put myself among the emerging authors. For more information, visit the website at aclib.us.
And now back to Nudge and Boost for Better Living with Dr. Bob Crow.
I read the news today, oh boy, about a lucky man who made the grade. And though the news was rather sad, well, I just had to laugh.
Well, here we are back from a break. And as the Beatles inspire us, we need to look at the news now and then, which I do every morning. This show is encouraging you to think in terms of behavioral logic and to examine what you're seeing around you and including in the newspaper for what it is saying about functions related to our quality of life. And those functions include nudging and boosting to obtain the behaviors we want, So let's look at the newspaper for just a bit, and we'll see today that one of the headlines is Egypt angered by U.S. aid cut. That's interesting. They're concerned that we're not going to deliver or are going to delay about $300 million in military and economic aid over our concerns about their human rights. We now invest somewhere around $1.5 billion in Egypt alone, and there are many other countries in the world. And Egypt is receiving that money from us, presumably because it is in our country's best interest to give them money. The way we were talking in this show, you and I, we would question, how does giving Egypt $1 billion or $2 billion or $10 billion serve to increase our quality of life? That's a very interesting question. Well, one of the things that we might consider is that our quality of life is impacted by our value system, including being nice to other people. So we have concerns about the well-being of people around the world. In fact, that's one of the reasons that many argue for opening our borders, in that around the world there are many people in very bad circumstances, living in garbage dumps or being oppressed by their government. So we do things to try to make other people's lives better, and we feel better for having done that. So in this case, we're talking about giving money to Egypt, maybe $1 billion or $2 billion, so that their lives will be better in that country and our lives will be better because we assisted them. It is somewhat aggravating to see a temper tantrum on the part of Egypt because we're delaying giving them $300 million, it is. We could think about it another way, too, is what do they do with that money once they get it? And it's one thing to aim the money at improving their quality of life or security for them relative to our best interests. Another is to see how they actually spend it. There's a huge difference between what people say and what people do. In this case, it's likely that Egypt is saying, we will use that money to buy arms, to buy food and medical supplies, and do other things to strengthen their security in ways that are pleasing to us. But that really bears some examination. Possibly one of our motives for delivering money to Egypt and all over the world is that the people who receive funds from us, very large amounts of funds, taxpayers' funds, are intended to purchase American military items and possibly food. So it could be one way to look at the huge amounts of money dumped on Egypt is that then they should be turning around and buying wheat and tanks from us, therefore building jobs or maintaining jobs and providing corporate profits and keeping farmers better economic situation than they would if we didn't give $1 billion to Egypt that they spend on us. That's an interesting circular notion, isn't it? The point of that is for you, the listeners, and me, all of us, to look at what's happening around us and apply to it a behavior logical perspective. What behaviors are being called for, what behaviors are being boosted, supported by everything you see around you and in the news, including in the news. So we could examine all the foreign aid that our country delivers for how it seems to be actually functioning to support improved situations in those countries and how it contributes to our quality of life, which might include, it makes us feel better, and it might include they buy stuff from us that then keeps jobs and profits flowing. Another headline in the news today is here, quote, Navy dismisses 7th Fleet commander after mishaps. Well, very obviously recently there have been 2 Navy ship collisions with the commercial craft freight ships at significant cost of lives and, of course, damage to several sets of vehicles. Apparently, there are about 4 of that kind of incident recently. That led the Navy to dismiss the commander of the 7th Fleet. Well, if you think about it, the commander of the 2nd Fleet was probably watching a movie or sleeping at the time all those 4 incidents occurred. And he is, 70 steps above the people who were in charge of navigating and commanding those ships during the time they had their incidences. So how can you say that a person very far removed, certainly not anywhere near the site of action, should be held responsible? Very good question. Well, this show deals with nudges and boosts. It should be a leader's job to develop nudges for the behaviors that should be shown and boost for them being, those behaviors being shown excellently. So it is not an unfair expectation to think that the top person in any organization should be responsible for generating very clear expectations about what behaviors they want to see happen and making very clear nudges and boosts for them to occur. The major theme, a continuing theme of this show, and of course the book that I refer to often, is to obtain for yourself understanding of nudging and boosting within a context of motivation, of course, and a value system that is yours to examine and enforce. Given that you have this overview of your value system and you are clear about the outcomes that you appreciate from performances of our government or coworkers or even your family members, then you are equipped to develop your own definitions of the behaviors that you're looking for, nudge to cause those behaviors to occur, and boost to maintain their occurrence. An example at the local level, your local level, might be to say that you value a clean and neat home, and you think that each individual living in the home should contribute in some way to the neatness and cleanliness of the home. Those are outcomes. Cleanliness is an outcome. Neatness is an outcome. You look around you and conclude that the room looks neat, the room looks clean. But those conclusions are based on your observations of more or less the product, you might say the product of behaviors. The room of your child might have clothes strewn around it and electronic devices dangling and otherwise unmade bed and just general junk laying around in the room. And you conclude that that is an unneat, unkept circumstance and you do something about it. Well, you have to translate doing something about it into behaviors that that person should show, like hang up their clothes and make the bed and put the dangling electronic equipment neatly on a tabletop. So again, I'm sharing with you, I hope clearly and emphatically, that the tools you have available for improving your quality of life and those around you include making very clear definitions of the behaviors that function to lead to conclusions that life is positive and better. And then your primary tools are nudge and boost. It's time for a break. This program is brought to you by the book authored by Dr. Bob Crow entitled Nudge and Boost for Better Living. Get more information or buy at www.nudgeandboost.com.
You're listening to Nudge and Boost for Better Living with Dr. Bob Crow on the Talk of Gainesville, 104.9 FM.
We are back, and we, as usual, is me, Dr. Bob Crow, and on my left, Quincy.
So for your dissertation, what did you do?
For the research?
Yeah.
Yeah, an earlier show you asked me about research on campus, and I mentioned training rats in it to a discrimination using errorless discrimination methods that presumably they could learn to more or less press the bar and light on and not press the bar and light off, learn to do that complex performance without errors. That was for my master's thesis. My dissertation was a project involving pigeons, and the title of it was Schedule-Induced Aggression in Pigeons. Now, that doesn't sound particularly interesting, maybe, but you think for a moment, what's the difference between the slot machine in Las Vegas and the vending machine down the hall? Well, the vending machine down the hall presents beautiful nudges, crackers and Oreos and things that you can see through the window. And it gives you an opportunity to stick money into it and do something like push a particular button or set of buttons that delivers to you every time whatever it is that you selected, or it's supposed to do that. In Las Vegas, the slot machine, is there to deliver you money now and then, but it doesn't do it very often. So you sit at the machine in Las Vegas expecting that you'll put in a certain amount of money and now and then get hopefully a larger amount of money back. Well, they're almost identical machines. They're rectangular and have buttons and attractive nudges, we might say. In this show, we should say that. And they each do some boosting now and then according to the way they are arranged. So we tolerate infrequent boosts at the slot machine, but we are intolerant of a vending machine not giving us something every time. We call that every time continuous reinforcement. Every time a behavior is emitted, then we expect a certain one-on-one occurrence of a boost. So if you do that to a pigeon, if you put a pigeon in a chamber and give it grain every time it presses a disc, then discontinue it, like move it to Las Vegas, and stop the delivery of food, that pigeon will attack another pigeon or otherwise flap its wings and poop and things to show that it's very upset by missing an accustomed reinforcer. So think about yourself in a vending machine. If you put $1 in or whatever is required and it does not pay off, a lot of people aggress against it. They at least swear, often hit, sometimes kick or deface the machine. But if they're in Las Vegas, they put in another $1 and another $1 and another $1 and another $1. That's an example of schedules of reinforcement. Now, one case, every time behavior is shown, the boost occurs. That's with the vending machine. And with the slot machine, only occasionally does a boost occur. And that intermittent reinforcement maintains very strong behavior over a long period of time. And as I mentioned with the pigeon, given the learning history of the pigeon or humans, their performance in the presence of the failure of a boost to occur has huge impacts on how they behave.
I have a question. Does corporal punishment work?
Well, corporal punishment, I assume you mean...
Beating on your kids.
Yeah, whapping, using a stick on a kid. Like any punishment, it should be expected that it will suppress the behavior that occurred just before corporal punishment occurred. So if a child is complaining or tantruming or even broken an object or done some behavior that are highly unvalued by the observer, undesirable, then the corporal punishment occurs, or it might be electric shock if you're so inclined. And it suppresses behavior, but it also is very likely to be accompanied by a counterattack, at least verbal, but might be physical, and should be expected to occasion escape and avoidance in the future. So the person whose subject is corporal punishment might leave and not come back, or might counterattack. But there's something I mentioned earlier in the show and earlier in this sequence of shows is that one of the big downsides of punishment is that it doesn't teach a desired behavior. So a person who is resorting to the use of corporal punishment, or even a browbeating, a verbal barrage of unpleasantness, has moved to a point where they're not trying to build behaviors that they want, but rather are trying to suppress behaviors that are unpleasant to them.
So spoil the ride and spare the ride. Spare the ride and spoil the child doesn't really work.
That's not a good. That's right. That's a common, commonly understood or spoken phrase, but it's very poor guidance. It should be something like dispense lots of boosts for behaviors that are clearly defined and neatly nudged. Then you won't need to have a rod or spank or even ball out.
Getting back to your dissertation, are animals easier to train than humans?
In some respects, they are very much easier to train than humans because they're reliable. If you can obtain animals when they're very young, so they have almost no learning history, and they can be kept in housing situations that are known, you know exactly what their bedding material is like, what their activity levels are, what they're eating, how much they're drinking. So you have a subject in your research controlled in very many important aspects, even things like reducing food for 24 hours so that the pigeon, in this case, maybe a rat, will work for food. Now, humans, we have so many restrictions, we really can't deprive them of food. We can do something like use snack materials, appropriate high nutrition snack materials, just before lunch, say, so that the child is deprived naturally from breakfast to lunch. But they not only are difficult to motivate in some basic ways, but they come very quickly to have a very complicated learning history. So we don't know what they've learned and not learned and what their environments call for in their usual daily routines, and we don't know what are effective boosts for them if they're strange to us. So in the rat, pigeon animals are very easy to train with regard to controlling their environment and learning histories, while humans are very difficult to train sometimes because we don't know what their learning histories are and what motivates them very well. There are some very interesting features about animal training that was described in a book entitled The Misbehavior of Organisms, written by Breland and Breland way back in the 40s, I guess. where they worked with many animals, training them for movies and things. And they ran into issues with animals, for example, pigs, rooting in mud. That's what those animals do. They have long evolutionary history of doing particular things, and like rooting to find edible things. So if you're trying to train a pig to do something around dirt and you don't want them to stick their nose in it, you probably picked the wrong organism. So there are pluses and minuses in working with animals.
No, I'm bouncing back and forth. I
Sure.
just thought of another question. If schools would use, and parents would use Nudge and Boost, there would be less kids on attention deficit drugs. You know what I'm saying?
Sure. Yeah, and I'll fall back like I like to do, and it's really important. All of us are being nudged and boosted all of the time. So our kids are, and by us and by teachers and people on the street and their social milieu, all of us are being nudged and boosted all the time. To the things like attention deficit or use of drugs or poor social interactions, we should look at the opposite of those things and look for what we do want. We want good social interactions. We want enjoyment of life without resorting to drugs, and so on. We want kids to study well and learn well and are proud of their learning and proud of their accomplishments. So all those things that you raised, and we can think about when the show's over too, all our lives are being nudged and boosted. Kids, we are being nudged to use drugs. We are being boosted when we do use them, like prescribed medications for, say, the tooth I had extracted last week. I was happy to have the drugs last week, but I know enough that to continue to use them is endangering my health and it's inappropriate. So I used as few of the drugs as I could, which was almost none, and I'm going to discard those that I didn't use. But that's related to my learning history and the nudges and boosts I get in my life, and that's the way people should examine their own lives and those about them for what is being nudged and what is being boosted. Time to take a break. Dr. Crow's book, Nudge and Boost for Better Living, is available at Amazon.com. Welcome back, or at least I'm back. I've been emphasizing in this show working toward quality of life outcomes. We could compare a circumstance in the country to circumstances in a corporation, where the climate is one that encourages the people in the corporation to behave in ways good for the corporation and hopefully good for the employees. If we were to organize our country so it became one with a corporate climate in which we would learn and prosper more than we do now, so that everyone everywhere is affected by this climate, we would have to arrange so the outcomes of our collective efforts are clear. From what we've said so far, clarity comes from behavioral and operational definitions. What do you do and what does your effort accomplish? And we had put the question of function, and that behavior accomplishes something, is it functional toward what? If it's functional toward increasing quality of life, then in the test we're applying today, that's a good one. There should be, in our corporation, a fine model at the top. The boss steps in, shows enthusiasm for what we do, shows professional attention to task. Should, in many ways, indicates an interest, a commitment to reaching the quality outcomes that we have identified earlier. So here comes the boss, appreciating what people do that is desirable and functional toward quality of outcomes, and models enthusiasm and commitment to doing a good job. In this corporation, there'd be very good training. The training would be very good in several regards. One of them is precise definitions in measurable terms of what people should learn to do that contributes to their quality of life and those around them. First step in a good training situation, like in education, is determining what should be learned. Then those who assist in making that learning happen, like teachers and parents, should be prepared with procedures that are based on science and socially and empirically validated so that they can teach effectively. So that
we have a model at the top that's presenting a view of what people should do, and that's reflected also in the instructors and the quality and content of the instruction that people are benefiting from. Then once education has done its contribution, all of us are behaving and living our lives every day, and every day that we're awake, our behaviors are being nudged and boosted. By now you've probably gotten a little tired of hearing that, but it's the truth. Science has abundantly, clearly demonstrated reinforcement works, and that behavior is a function of its consequences. The things that come before behavior indicate which ones should or should not be done. Behaviors occur and consequences follow them. Now, an instructor or a parent, for example, can use a procedure called shaping. A desired high-quality behavior is known by the person who's doing shaping, and they watch for stepwise improvements in their student. And as they make stepwise improvements, they show their very positive regard for it. And after a while, the less sophisticated and less desirable behaviors are left behind as new behaviors are learned in a shaping process. We should be doing that all the time. You watch your child or coworker or wife or husband. You can observe for little steps of better performance. They help more. They're more positive in the way they interact. They take more responsibility for their behaviors, and you can show appreciation. That's shaping. But we're in a corporation and in a country, so there should be contingencies around us that differentially support things like voting and keeping your sidewalks clean and showing respect and regard for your fellow citizens. There should be clear contingencies everywhere in the corporation. What are you supposed to do, and what are the contributions to the success of the corporation based on what you're contributing? Those sorts of notions can be built into a system, and in fact are being built into some systems around the world today. There are, as I've mentioned earlier, several countries, including Germany, the Netherlands, and the United Kingdom, that have adopted behavioral insights teams, more or less the concepts of nudging, to guide the way the national programs are designed and conducted. And then from this program, we're taking a bit broader view than nudging, and including boosting and also implying upon it considerations about quality of life and the functions of behaviors that are nudged and boosted as they contribute to the well-being of our country. Now, one kind of corporation, if you will, you might recognize as a corporate circumstance, is a school, particularly, in my case, an elementary school. So I was fortunate enough to have programmatic control over an elementary school in Nevada for 3 years. The reason I was in that school is because it presented problems to the district so much that they wanted to direct some effort toward problem solving. And if you noticed earlier programs or read my book, which you have to buy or you want to read it, I note that my first occupation out of graduate school was as a problem solver in a large school district. So I went wherever my boss was convinced there was a significant problem, and I intervened upon it. And I did that at a wide range of kinds of problems. And one day he asked me, would you be willing to take the lead in an entire elementary school to more or less problem solve? I listened to him a little bit more, and he was my boss, and I appreciate trying to contribute. And it turns out that the school was located outside edge of the school system in the county, and it showed about a 75% attendance. Remember, it's elementary school, so it's kindergarten through 6th grade, and already in those young years, 25% of the kids did not come to school per day. There's quite a bit of defacing in the school, breaking of tender objects, art-like objects around the building, and spray paint or even crayon disfiguring of the building, windows, and so on. There were angry parents, obvious. They thought the school was not serving their interests, and the community often made expressions toward the school board or in the news or even toward leadership of the school that they were disenchanted and the school wasn't paying attention to them. I looked into the data a bit besides attendance data and found that the achievement rate, the rate of growth in academic areas at the present time that I looked at it, was about 1/4 year growth per school year. So by the time my child had gotten into 3rd and 4th grade, it's nearly a year behind what is expected in reading, math, science, and social studies. Well, we just heard that a corporate climate should have some targets, but the targets in this case are determined by what people call a curriculum, which really deserves a great deal of attention on its own. Where does the curriculum come from? What does it say? It's supposed to, in my understanding, describe to everyone, teachers and leaders and community, what the product of education should be, like ability to read and do math and some other things. I'm not sure the curriculums today are actually what we might like them to be. We adopted a curriculum. I trained the teachers a bit as we've been talking today in positive but nudge and boost kinds of interventions in their classroom. We put little posters in the classrooms that said things like, be immediate, positive, and consistent with regard to kids who are on task or producing academic materials. We measured in every classroom how often teachers were positive to their kids, and at baseline found about 1 positive in 20 minutes and maybe as many as 10 negatives. Stop that, don't do that. I told you to get back on task. That was not a good thing to do, and so on. We'd hear 10 of those, but maybe 1 good job in 20 minutes. After modeling, finding kids being on task and being positive with them, and after a little bit of training in how to be positive, immediate, and consistent, by the end of a year, we were finding that the student growth was about 1.25 years per year. Parents were reporting that they were very happy with the students were bringing home and their evidence of being successful at school. The teachers told me the students were going through more materials in 1/4 year than they did all years previously, and they were very happy at working extra hard. And attendance went from 75% to actually often was 100%. Now and then we'd see an illness sweep through the school because sick kids had come to school. There's a quick example about how a corporate climate can include a vision for where we're going, a model for how to accomplish it, the application of positive and negative consequences, mostly avoiding the negative, boosting the performances that were desired in order to get them. And we went from kids who were falling badly behind to kids who were actually exceeding. So we're coming to the end of this show today, and it's been a nice opportunity for me to vent and then to share some more ideas with you. Best wishes for effective nudging and boosting in your life.
You feel better now?
I feel better now.
I see trees of green, red roses too. I see them bloom